How's it going? Welcome back to Kind Regards, the show. Today I want to talk a little bit about independence. I'm going to split it up into two parts. So this is kind of part one, psychological independence. This plays a little bit off the episode about taking refuge, but primarily, I suppose the episode is about, independence, dependence, where we find our psychological well-being and where we ultimately should find our psychological well-being. I myself have been, I suppose, dependent on a variety of things for my psychological well-being over my life, and still am to a large degree. I think it's probably the enlightened person who is free of, I suppose, the requirement for certain conditions to be met in order for their well-being to flourish. So, for a long time I was really nervous, and my nervousness or my anxiety, I suppose, had to be, tamed with substance use, or tamed with the reassurance that I was a good person, and I'd kind of get that through social contact, social interaction, hang out with friends, and every time I'd make them laugh, I'd get this little bit of relief, oh, okay, I mustn't be a total failure, because they like it when I say these things. So I got to be good somehow, or I'd get it through substances, kind of turn the mind off, so I wasn't hurtling through mental anguish, from one disappointment in myself to the next. Now that sounds quite dramatic, but and maybe it wasn't that all the time, but sometimes I would have a really hard time, I guess, looking at my own life, and so that's kind of what I mean by that. But the substances would sort of tame that and make it so that I wasn't really having many thoughts at all. And if I did have a sort of thought that could be called, I suppose, negative self-talk or something like that, it would quickly I'd quickly be distracted by something else. And so if I didn't have these things, if I was sort of forced to be alone for a long time or sober for a long time, even just a version of alone, even if I just had to be with people who I didn't know very well, who I couldn't manipulate into giving me validation in whatever way, if I didn't know how to make them say, oh wow, that's really interesting, or oh, that's so funny, or oh, where did you learn that, oh, you know so much, or whatever, whatever the validation, the little affirmation was of my worth. If I couldn't get that from people, that was being alone, in this sense. And so if I was alone, or I was away, if I was sober, some sort of forced sobriety from my external environment, I would feel really quite troubled. And a lot of emotion would sort of bubble up, and I would have a really hard time. And so I was dependent. My psychological well-being was dependent on all these conditions being met, all these external circumstances. And that you pay quite a big price for that. I suppose that's kind of self-evident. But I think that, in the extreme, I suppose substance use is somewhat extreme. But having a couple beers 4 nights a week, is a less extreme version of sort of the same thing. If you didn't do that, would you be totally fine? Would you be totally at ease? Or would you maybe find it harder to wind down after work? I don't know, but I would say that that's a question worth asking, and I'll elaborate on that in a minute. But another example is, for me at least, was TV and entertainment and movies. I'd watch movies and think oh, I'm being such a art critic, I'm being so deep and all this stuff, when really I was just distracting myself from my feelings, from my lack of well-being. I'd switch this thing on and then, all right, sweet, 2 hours go past without me really having to worry about how I'm feeling. I'd be taken away on this dream, this film that sort of captures your attention and your imagination and your thought and directs it in these certain ways. Somewhat predictably, if you know genres of movies, you can kind of preempt a little bit that they're not going to challenge you too much. They're not going to put a mirror up to yourself too much. So yeah, great. I'll watch this funny, semi-deep movie that won't challenge me too much, and that'll be 2 hours where I don't need anything. I don't need to look at my own life. And so people do that a lot. In the Seeking Refuge episode, I reference, taking refuge in our status, in our bank accounts, in our relationships with others. Oh, well, I've got a beautiful wife, so I must be pretty good. Oh yeah, sure, I feel inadequate sometimes, but I've got this thing. This is taking refuge. This is being emotionally dependent, I think. I would describe it that way, on external circumstances to maintain our well-being. And I suppose that brings us to the question of, what are we supposed to do about this? If it is a negative thing to be dependent on external factors, maybe first we should ask, why is that a bad thing? And I would say that it's a bad thing because, and this is a bit of a Buddhist perspective, we cannot rely on the external world. The external world is changing all the time. In fact, our internal world is changing too all the time. If we rely on our thoughts are vapid and run away from us, So if we rely on our, thoughts about our own status, what if those thoughts aren't there? What if all of a sudden we don't see ourselves as high status individuals? What if our status in a more tangible way evaporates? We lose our job, or our friend group, one by one moves away, and we don't have that validation of, oh, you're so funny, or you're so interesting. In my case, like, those were the sort of phrases that I was looking for. And so if these things are transient, if they're ultimately unreliable, then by becoming dependent on them, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment and withdrawal and a pretty hard time. It's the same issue with substances. If you become dependent on them and then all of a sudden you don't have access, you're in a really tough spot. And so that's the why of independence. But then what's like the how? How are we supposed to become independent of external circumstances in terms of our well-being? How are we supposed to cultivate well-being without these external circumstances being the be-all and end-all? We can't get rid of them. We can't divorce ourselves from, the pleasures of eating, from, certain types of entertainment. Songs are nice and you're going to hear them, unless you're in a mountain monastic context, you're going to, walk past pictures that make you feel good, and on billboards or whatever, and you're going to hear music in the supermarket. You're going to have relationships with people, however, small those relationships are, a supermarket clerk or whatever. You're going to get social feedback. We can't get rid of these things. So independence should not be thought of as cutting ourselves off, because that seems, I suppose in the Buddhist context, that's the ascetic sort of way of running things. No bodily pleasures, no sexual desire, no, tasty food. I'm going to starve myself and take away all the pleasure, and that way I won't be attached. That's sort of the way that the Buddha went initially, after his sort of very princely upbringing with lots of wealth and lots of sensual pleasures. He goes the opposite way, and then goes, this is its own kind of unfreedom, cutting ourselves off from the beauty of the world and the pleasures of the world. And so what's the third way? He calls it the third way, is to have these things and yet not be attached to these things. And that means developing equanimity in the face of pain and in the face of pleasure. Equanimity being a sense of peace, a sense of mental stability. That means when good things arrive, that's nice, but I don't need them I'm not attached to them. When they leave, that's okay. And it's sort of typified in the just this mentality, you know. Oh, what is this sensation I'm feeling? Oh, it's just this. You know, I don't need to label it and capture it and surround it and say, oh, it's, you know, it's conceptually sort of summed up and therefore repeatable and manipulatable. You know, oh, I'm having this delicious bowl of food and this is how it's cooked, and I can get this again if I come back to this restaurant at this time when this chef is working, then I can recreate this experience. No. Let's just keep it very simple. It's not reproducible. It's just this. And the equanimity, at least in Goenka's sort of practice of Vipassana meditation, equanimity comes with the recognition of impermanence. And we can feel equanimous when we go, okay, this pleasure I'm feeling, it's always changing. It's forever changing. And so how can I be attached? How can I cling on to something? How can I cling on to dry sand that's just falling through my fingers? How can I do that? It doesn't make any sense. All that we're left with is just being in the moment, feeling the things that we're feeling, and when it changes, we let it change, because it's inevitably gonna change. So we're not grasping anymore when we recognize impermanence. That's sort of how we develop equanimity like that. The same thing goes for pain. You know, I'm in the meditation practice of Vipassana, you sit in Goenka's practice of Vipassana, you sit and you don't move even for up to an hour at a time. And it hurts. You know, my knees start to hurt, you get pins and needles, which is quite uncomfortable, and your back or your shoulders might hurt. And what do you do during this pain? Instead of conceptualizing it, oh, I am in pain, I'm feeling badly, I don't want this to continue, what if this continues on and on, how long will this last for? All of these are ideas, they're notions, they're thoughts. And by jumping into thought, we grab the present moment, we stretch it into the future, and we go, oh, this pain, what if it lasts forever? Oh no. And that, oh no, that's the real pain. You know, that's the real suffering, the difference between pain and suffering. The suffering is, oh, I can't bear the future, I can't bear this any longer. Which, if we step back from thought and we reject this notion, and the thought comes up and we go, oh, I'm feeling so bad, and we go, oh, no, I'm just feeling this. What's this that I'm feeling? It's just this. And now it's this. And now it's this. Instead of going, oh, how can I bear it? How can I bear pain all the way into, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, into the future? Instead, we come to the fact, the experiential fact, that we've already borne it. We've already handled the pain of the present moment, every single present moment that we're in. Does that make sense? Like we're constantly bearing suffering, when we're in pain. Rather, we're constantly bearing pain in each present moment. And that's really, unless you conceptualize it into the future and go, oh, it's going to continue, oh, it's so bad, oh, I hate this. Unless you do that, the problem passes as soon as it arrives. As soon as it arises in consciousness, the searing feeling, the stabbing sensation, the tingling that is so uncomfortable, as soon as it arises, it simultaneously is gone, or rather changes into something else. It's always changing, which is much easier to bear than, let's say, looking down the barrel of another 20 minutes of pain. That feels unbearable. The future feels unbearable. But the present is not just easier to bear, but in each instant we've already borne it. I hope that's clear. And so that's a specific sort of meditation pain example, but we can do the same thing with anxieties. We can do the same thing with, oh, am I all that my parents, hoped for me? Oh, the teachers in my life had such high hopes, and what have I done with them? I don't have a graduate position. This is all me projecting, by the way. I don't have a graduate position. Oh, my siblings, they're so successful. What do I have to show for it? What if people don't recognize, my, uh, the things that I like to do? All of these are thoughts, and all of these are only unbearable when we project them into the future. And when we say, this anxiety will not go away unless something is resolved. Does that make sense? I'm trying to make the connection here, I suppose, between thought and conceptualization, stretching the present suffering that we're going through into the future, the present anxiety into the future, and then when we do that, we become dependent on external circumstances to be resolved in a certain way. Otherwise, we're screwed. Otherwise, I'll always be a disappointment to my parents unless I make so much money or, become something that they understand and respect. I'll always be a disappointment. And then boom, we're dependent, like a drug, like I need nice weather to be happy. Or if my dog is sick, then I'm just a wreck. Whatever the thing is that we're dependent on, we're dependent. And we're an addict. We're an addict to our parents' affections. We're an addict to our status. We're an addict to our, wealth or romantic pursuits or whatever the thing is. And then we're trapped. We're ultimately trapped. And instead, the alternative is shockingly simple, but quite difficult to learn and not intuitive in a Western context. And that is, it's just this. It's just what I'm going through. Can I handle this exact moment? Well, yeah, I just handled it. I just handled it. It's gone. Now it's gone. And true, another moment replaces it. And maybe it gets worse. Maybe the anxiety builds and builds. But it doesn't stay forever. Everything which arises also passes away. And so I say it's easy, or rather it's simple. I say it's simple. I don't say it's easy because it's not. For me, at least. I say it's simple because that is really the gist of the teaching. It's been said, I'm not sure who by, that if you boil down Buddhism to its essence, it is this: everything which arises also passes away. That's the ultimate truth of the Buddhist teaching. And that means if we stay with the present moment, we watch the present moment unfold, and we avoid this idea that we know the future, that we can draw concepts and then those concepts are patterns that will inevitably occur in the future. No, it's just this. It's just what's arising. When we do that, we see that everything is changing, and therefore we don't need to be afraid of pain, don't need to be afraid of anxiety, we don't need to be afraid of suffering or inadequacy. Instead, we can just let them play out. We can just let them happen because they don't shake the foundation of awareness. Now, when I say the foundation of awareness, I'm kind of opening up another topic here, and I might save that for another video because I don't want this one to run too long. But the sort of key thing that I'm thinking about is, what am I dependent on for my well-being? What am I dependent on for my contentment, my peace of mind? And can I, when I realize that I'm not feeling well, I'm not feeling content, can I realize that actually I don't need these things to let go of the future and the past? I don't need to, not be thirsty in order to be okay with this moment. I can accept where I am, what I'm doing. I can accept my entire experience with a choice, and then I can accept all that comes with it. I can accept the thirst. I can accept that some sun's in my eyes, traditionally not an ideal thing, but it's all a part of this moment. And once I accept it, I'm no longer resistant to it. I'm no longer dependent on some other set of circumstances to arise. I'm just here. And that's all it is. Let's call it let's call it there. That's kind regards. I hope you enjoyed. And any questions, any need for elaboration, please let me know. I'd be glad to elaborate. These concepts can be, I had to hear them a lot of times from a lot of different perspectives to sort of have them clicking in my mind or have them take on some kind of significance. For a long time I went, yeah, but, but I've got bigger problems, or yeah, but, what are you really suggesting? This thing, and I take them to the extreme and then go, I can't believe in this. So sometimes we need a bit of clarification. So if you need that, that's no worries. Chuck in a comment and I'll try and address that specifically, and maybe that'll help. But yeah, this has been Kind Regards. Thanks very much for watching.